Welcome to the Holy Post. A new iPad advertisement showing musical instruments and art supplies being crushed by a hydraulic press has triggered a backlash against Apple, and it's provoking a wider discussion about the impact of technology on both communities and creativity. Related to that, Jonathan Haidt says that religious kids have better mental health on average because they're connected to incarnate congregations, and the Catholic Church is disciplining an AI priest. Then Kaitlyn talks to Matthew Niermann about the Lausanne Movement's massive new report on global Christianity and the major trends shaping the future of the church. All of that, plus cicada rain. Here is episode 617. Hello, welcome back to the Holy Post. It's Skye Jitani. Joining me is Kaitlyn Chess. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hi, Skye.
And once again, I cannot believe it. We are Phil-less. We are without Phil. We have no Phil. I thought for sure that streak was broken and he was going to be here for a while, but no, we are Phil-less. I apologize, everybody. Good news is he's not gone because his wife is in the hospital again. Lisa, as far as I know, her recovery is going well. We got a message from Phil this morning that he's sick, not like hospital sick, just sick, under the weather sick. And so we're flying without Phil today. I apologize to everybody who wanted more Phil, but it's just me and Kaitlyn. You know what, Kaitlyn? Just to honor the fact that it's just me and you, I should probably switch hats again, shouldn't I?
Yes! Look at that.
It's too tight. It's too small. It's a small hat.
Your head is too big.
My head is too big. All right. For those of you not watching this on video, I have taken off my Miami hat and I put on the hat that Kaitlyn sent me, and it's a Swiftie hat. And
Swiftie.
I already feel demonic.
Established 1989. No, you do not.
It's not good. I have the mark of the beast on my head now.
You do not. No.
I do. All right. No. Well, here's the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Kaitlyn.
This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created. The pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode. This episode is sponsored by World Relief, the Christian humanitarian organization that we trust to tackle the challenges at the border and around the world. Do you know how World Relief got its start? During the Second World War, folks at the historic Park Street Church in Boston, Massachusetts, took up a special offering during the Lenten season to provide for the needs of people displaced by the fighting in Europe. 80 years later, that spirit of generosity still lives on in World Relief. The compassionate men and women of Park Street Church decided not to settle for just doing church. They decided to be the church. They lived and left a legacy. Do you want this to be your story too? Check out The Path, World Relief's monthly giving community, to learn more about how your partnership can create lasting change.
All right, Kaitlyn, what have you been up to? What's new?
Oh, man, not a lot. I'm just studying German, just trying to master some German. It's
the
really
summer
hard.
Of German studies,
I gotta tell you, I'm annoyed at it. I'm annoyed at the German language. I feel myself increasingly annoyed at German people. It's not fair of me. I'm just frustrated. It's a hard language to learn.
I've never studied German. All I know is they don't use the space bar enough.
What? Oh, yeah, because there's just two. Yeah, they stick all their words together. That's true. That's true. And what I learned today, this was truly wild. I was translating today and I got my translation all wonky because I had never been taught how they use quotation marks. Do you know how they use quotation marks?
I do not.
It's like a comma at the beginning and then a apostrophe at the end. So I was all off because I didn't even know to look down.
So instead of double quotation marks, they're just single
quotation. It's just one,
okay.
and it starts at the bottom and ends at the top.
Okay. That's it.
That's weird, right?
I don't know. Do other languages do that?
I'm sorry to German people. I don't know of any that do. I'm just confused. I was prepared for a single instead of a double. I wasn't prepared for single and double, and one starts at the bottom and one starts at the
Well, it's like Spanish does top and bottom, but they do double, don't they? I think so.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know any Spanish.
It's been I barely got through 2 years of Spanish in high school and another year and a half in college, but I don't want to talk about that. It's probably not okay.
Probably
anyway,
not good, yeah.
Yeah. So a couple things before we jump into some of the stories for today. We did a live event last week. I did a live event last week.
How was it?
In Nashville with David French and Mike Erie at the Journey Church. And it was really great. It was wonderful. We had like 250 people come out for that.
So fun.
And it's only the second one I've done because you and I did one in Orlando a while back. And it is a ton of fun. Meeting all the holy posters and the Q&A. And so David and Mike and I got into a discussion about pacifism because of the conversation I had with Shane Claiborne on the recent Sky Pod. And then we took questions from everybody, and it ranged from the election to how do you deal with criticism to the Kendrick Lamar Drake fiasco going on. I mean, it was like all over. I like that
someone thought you three were the three to answer.
Yeah, I know. Like, I had nothing to contribute to that conversation, but it was really, really nice. Thank you to everybody who's listening who came out for that event. Thank you to the Journey Church, Mike's church, for hosting us and putting on such a great event for everybody. You have an event coming up soon in Washington, D.C. Next week? What day is that?
Oh no, Sky, don't.
Yeah, I just want people to know so they can go out. It is
on the 23rd, May 23rd.
Okay. If you live in the Washington, D.C., Virginia, Northern Virginia area, you can go to holypost.com/events and get your tickets for that. I was surprised at how far people came from for the Nashville event. We had people from
every time.
St. Louis, from Kentucky, from Georgia, from all over. And so hopefully people will come out and see
and we have
you in DC.
Great people joining me in
Who's
DC.
Joining you?
Walter Kim, who's the president of the National Association of Evangelicals and is just a friend of mine and really wonderful to talk to.
He is great.
He's so kind. And Mike Kelsey, who's a local pastor. And so we're going to talk about like Christian approaches to politics and how the church is involved. And so I think it'll be a good way to have some practical, if some people complain on the show that we're just critical or that we, are too abstract. These are two people in the weeds institutionally of trying to do Christian life better and more faithfully. So I hope that they will help us do that.
Cool. For those of you who are not at the Nashville event, I do know that it was recorded. I think video and audio. And I don't know yet what we're going to do with that content, but it probably, if we use it, is going to be for Holy Post Plus subscribers only. Another incentive for signing up for Holy Post Plus, so you can get some of that. I don't know if your event will be recorded or filmed, but we're trying to do more of these. There's going to be a list of cities and dates coming out for the fall pretty soon that we will announce. So stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more coming. Thank you for everyone who's joining us for those live events and the evenings with the Holy Post. But Kaitlyn, before we get into the serious stuff, I have to get into some animal news. Are you ready for my animal news segment?
Okay, look, I'm sad Phil's not here and I'm ready for Phil to be back. But I do love that when it's you and me, there's animal news and not butt news.
Well, don't get too happy yet.
No.
Okay.
No.
So, Kaitlyn, which animal is the strongest urinator in the animal kingdom?
What?
I don't even
know what that means.
The strongest urinator.
I don't know.
You don't know?
And
You'd be surprised. I'm just going to tell you right now, you're going to be very surprised.
I'm sure I will, because I don't even know.
Any guesses? You don't want to play along at all?
I don't.
Come on. All right, I don't even. Fine. No, go. What?
No, tell me. I don't want to guess.
I was surprised. The strongest urinator in the animal kingdom is the cicada.
Oh my gosh.
Right. All the more reason why we should be worried about this here.
Awful.
So the article says, you may think 1 trillion noisy periodic cicadas emerging in the Midwest and southern states this spring is gross, but we've got something even more disgusting to tell you. As brood 13 and brood 19 cicadas emerge, the 2 broods will also produce huge amounts of pee. Yes, pee,
great.
more commonly called honeydew, or I love this, it's known as cicada rain.
No, absolutely.
Yes. Which sounds like a Weird Al spoof on Purple Rain from Prince.
Oh my God.
Right. Cicada rain, cicada rain. All right. Cicadas consume 300 times their weight in xylem or plant sap each day. And they can release each day. That's nuts. And they can release their pee as high as 10 feet in the air in 1 second. Which makes cicadas the strongest urinators in the animal kingdom, with flows that put elephants and humans to shame. Okay, and the crazy part is, we'll link to this article. There's a video in the article of cicadas peeing.
I die.
And it's crazy. They shoot their pee so far, but that's why
see it?
You can see it. So here's where it gets weird. Most insects consume xylem tree sap and typically pee in small droplets. Just little, drop here, drop there, no big whoop. And that conserves the energy as they expel waste. But since cicadas consume 300 times their weight in plant sap, they expel waste fluid in jets to be more energy efficient. And gets even better. They will also use their pee jets to ward off other cicadas and birds.
No.
They shoot birds to protect themselves.
No.
So anyway, the article has an image, like a warning sign with cicadas flying above and pee coming down and a person holding an umbrella. They actually say you should use umbrellas when you're walking through like heavily cicada populated areas.
You're joking.
I am not joking.
You're conning me now.
Okay, are there cicadas near you? Do you know this?
Yes, lots.
Are there? Or have they already emerged?
Oh, totally, yeah.
And do you feel anything that feels like,
No, I don't.
You should be warned. It's not good. They haven't quite emerged here. Like in Illinois, where we are, is one of the like hot zones for cicadas. There's going to be a ton of them. But I was helping my wife plant some stuff recently, and when you dig into the ground, like I can see them. They're coming up. They're there. But they haven't totally emerged yet.
We had a whole conversation in Sunday school this week, because you know how with kids, when someone says one thing, it's like all anyone can talk about. So suddenly it was like I heard every story of every time in the last week they picked up a cicada, they saw a cicada. So I'm a little nervous that next week some of these kids are going to come with
Okay,
cicadas.
Caitlin, you could be the coolest Sunday school teacher.
I knew you were going to say this.
If you tell them about cicada pee, cicada rain. Let's be more delicate about it.
I can't.
Yes.
Their parents would not be happy with me.
Oh, they would love it. It's part of God's wondrous creation.
Oh, God. I don't know. That really could be an effect of the fall. We can't be confident.
Oh, I think it's amazing. I originally thought when I saw the headline about cicadas being the strongest urinators in the animal kingdom, that it's because they've been holding that pee for 17 years. It's got to be building up. But that's not actually the case. It's because they consume so much tree sap. Yeah,
wow. Incredible.
It is incredible.
Amazing.
I think it is amazing. I was impressed, and I have new respect for the cicada, the lowly cicada. Okay. Should we move on to something?
Please.
Mm-hmm. Oh, don't pretend like you didn't enjoy that. And you are going to be thinking about it for the next 6 days.
Unfortunately,
before Sunday school. And you're going to be going, do I or do not tell them about the cicada rain?
I probably will. I want to be cool too badly, so I probably will.
There you go. All right. So Apple released an ad last week that got quite a bit of attention. I'm sure people listening to this know what I'm talking about. They released an ad for their new iPad Pro, and the title of the ad was just Crush, which I didn't realize was the title until later, which...
Wow.
Okay. Do you want to describe the ad? I'm sure you've seen it.
Yes. So I don't know what's playing. What song is playing while it's happening?
It's Sonny and Cher's song, All I Need Is You.
I just know that it felt so dystopian and that it was like upbeat music that was supposed to make you feel good, but also the visual is of all of these tools, creative tools for making art and music, and there's a piano and there's a record player and etc. All of that is like on a stage, and then it slowly just gets smashed. If people are very online people, which they probably are if they listen to the podcast, you probably have seen that there's like, this is probably why they did this ad. There's all these viral TikToks of watching machines squash things, and people get enjoyment out of the hydraulic press.
Yeah.
Sky, I just call it a thing that's squashing a thing. And it squashes all of these tools, and there's like paint splattering, and there's like a little, I don't know if it's like a stuffed animal emoji kind of thing that's getting squashed. And then when it opens up, there's just the iPad, and it's like the thinnest, most powerful iPad that Apple has released. And it's horrifying. It's a very I thought violent... it was intentionally horrifying, but clearly it's not. They're trying to get you to buy the iPad. But I had the reaction a lot of people on the internet apparently did, which was sheer horror.
Yeah, it's a very violent, I mean, not like gory violent, but it's a destructive, violent ad of this giant hydraulic press crushing and destroying all of these, in some cases, beautiful instruments, right? Pianos and trumpets and a metronome and
easels and paint. And,
So it seems like it was kind of counterintuitive, because I think Apple was trying to communicate that they are a creative company that empowers other creatives to make creative things. But the ad is all about destruction and destroying things, which is kind of weird. So a bunch of people reacted negatively to this. Hugh Grant, the actor, on Twitter said, "The destruction of the human experience, courtesy of Silicon Valley."
Oh my goodness.
And someone else on X, Twitter, whatever it's called, Luke Barnett, who's actually been on our show before. He's an actor, producer, and screenwriter. He said, "If you thought this iPad ad was weird, you should have seen the first cut where they lined up all your favorite characters and shot them."
Oh my gosh.
Which just kind of gets to the point of just how graphic and destructive this whole thing was. So Paul Pastor, who actually is a friend of mine and worked with me at Christianity Today back in the day, he wrote a piece for CT about it called Rage Against the Apple Machine. And he talks about just at length how Apple, this ad in a weird way embodies what Apple's really all about, and technology in general, that it is trying to replace the more incarnate forms of human creativity and flatten everything down into just this disincarnate digital experience. So I thought it'd be good for us to talk about this and use it as a launch pad for technology in general, and eventually get to, well, what does this mean beyond just the impact of this technology on creative efforts, but what about any other human efforts? What are the pros and cons of technology? By the way, before we get into that, because the backlash was so pronounced, Tim Cook issued an apology saying that they had, quote, missed the mark on the ad.
I didn't see this.
But I wonder, like this
also got them publicity.
Exactly. So I'm wondering, did they really not know what kind of reaction this ad was going to get? Or did they know people were going to be upset and it would just make the ad go viral? Are they that obtuse and didn't get it, or did they really get it and they're like, ha?
That's a good question. I did see some people on Twitter who said like only the most tech people could think that this was a good idea, which I do think that could be a possibility too, of like, you live in a tech world bubble and don't realize that other people will be horrified at the instruments and tools that they use, or that their friends use, or that people they admire use being destroyed, would spark that kind of reaction. But I also think you're right. It could have been, engineered that way.
And they're like, there's so many other ways to get at the same idea. Like, they could have had the iPad at the beginning and then done the opposite and shown how much creativity
could come out of it. Yeah, totally.
Right. And all the instruments and all the paint and all the whatever. Or they could, Apple famously has had ads that are very abstract. You remember the old ads of people like dancing with their headphone wires?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like, there's so many creative ways they could have communicated the seemingly infinite possibilities for creativity that come out of this iPad, despite being the thinnest one they've ever produced. But they did the opposite, and like, it communicated that our technology is destroying the world that came before. And that's a weird message to be sending. It felt very kind of imperial.
Yeah.
Like tanks crushing things and destroying. It was just, it was icky. Okay. So theologically speaking, what's your take on the ad? I like speaking
theologically.
You do think theologically.
I think what this ad made me think about the most, and this is something that a good friend of mine, Kendall Vanderslice, and I talk about a lot. So it might sound, her words might come out of my mouth to give her credit, but we think about this a lot, mostly because we both live really online lives, and it would be hypocritical for you and I on this podcast, as we are connected via the internet and streaming for people, to be like, all technology is bad and we should go back to every analog thing, But what I've perceived to be the problem a lot of the time, and I think this ad captures this pretty well actually, is both the problem of we don't recognize that this technology is good for some things and bad for other things. Like, it is good for us, producing a podcast together. It is not good if you were married to someone you only ever saw via the internet. Like, there's certain things it can facilitate and there's certain things it cannot facilitate. Like, on some level, if you don't recognize the limitations of this thing, if you don't recognize this iPad can do amazing things, it can't do what a piano can do. And let's not pretend that it can. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to end up squashing the piano because you think this thing can do it. Which leads to the second thing of, we can recognize the goodness that technology offers us, but we also have to acknowledge the cost of it. There is always a cost. There's always a cost of, when I choose this thing over this other thing gets used less, or it's valued less, and to not recognize the cost that comes with it means we'll make pretty kind of flagrant decisions. Like, we won't be really sensitive or cautious about what we're using because we think there's no cost when there is a cost. So is it sometimes the right decision to use an iPad to make something as opposed to some other tool? Yeah, there's probably a time when it makes the most sense to do that. For example, when I personally bought an iPad, it was because I was starting my doctoral program and I was like, I'm going to have to read all these articles. I don't want to print everything out. I want to save the trees. I don't want everything to be in paper. And it is really useful for me to be able to get on an airplane and have all of these articles that I need to read for school. And I can highlight with my little Apple Pencil, and it's really easy and great. There's other things that iPad can't do. And I get frustrated when I don't have a physical book in my hand sometimes, to be honest. And I forget that there is a cost of both, I don't have a physical connection to this material, and do I learn a certain relationship to what I'm reading, what I'm creating, the relationship that I'm facilitating through this technology that I wouldn't learn if it was done in person or through another tool that is more analog or something like that. And if I'm not cognizant of that cost, it'll be worse for me because I'll think, oh, this is just fine. It's a simple substitute. Nothing is lost. If you don't recognize the thing that's lost, you squash it. Like in this, I mean, it really is a representation of what is lost, as if it isn't anything that's lost. But there is something lost, which we all learned when we had a super visceral reaction to it. That was actually, I think, a kind of beautiful moment for a lot of people to just suddenly realize that even if intellectually I don't think there's anything lost, my gut reaction to that image told me that there's just something very human lost. And that's something we should listen to.
Yeah, the only way that you could have made that perhaps more visceral was, instead of, if it wasn't musical and artistic instruments and tools, what if it was like a bunch of children crushed under that hydraulic press, and then what comes out is an iPad, and like a grandmother picks it up and is just watching her grandchildren via FaceTime? We would all be horrified by that. And on one level you go, well, yes, this is if you live across the country from your grandkids, this is a tool that allows you to see them in a way that you couldn't have 10 or 15 years ago.
And that's beautiful.
It is, but it's not a replacement for the incarnate relationship. I actually have my iPad Pro here because I've been scrambling to get, I have to do 52 doodles, illustrations for my next What If Jesus Was Serious book. Mm-hmm. And I do them on an iPad Pro. And I just did this, for those of you who can't see it. That is my illustration of the unquenchable fire and undying worms that Jesus talks about in Mark 9. But I can do that on an iPad, and it's great. And it's so much easier to do all these illustrations than if I actually use paper and paint or ink or whatever it might be. And I'm grateful for that tool. But it isn't just the creativity that gets crushed in these things. It is sometimes community and incarnate engagement. So what about the implications of this? And we've talked about it in the past, but how do you think it's affecting people, not just in their engagement with tangible instruments, but in their engagement with tangible community? And
yeah,
do you think we're reaching a turning point where people are going, okay, enough is enough. We need to return to real life community again? Or is that ship sailed?
Yeah. I mean, this goes back to what you said earlier about thinking about this theologically, which sometimes we can do this in a kind of trite way where we just go back to the incarnation as if that is obviously tells us everything we need to know. But it does tell us a lot that not only that God, as Eugene Peterson says, moved into our neighborhood, but sometimes we think about that fully as if it's just like, oh, it's great that Jesus became a man and we can identify with that and he experienced things we experience. We forget that on just like a very minute level, like God taking on flesh dignifies creation in a way that nothing else really can. Like Jesus had in his body, like bacteria, like we do, that make sure our digestion system works correctly. Like in his bones, there's creation that is dignified, right? Like there's just something truly incredible about the fact that in the incarnation, God says creation is good, which God had said before, but even after the fall says this is good and I am willing to take on this level of suffering to redeem it. That's incredible. When it comes to the technology part, I really do think you're right that we're going to see a turn here. I just recently was at a coffee shop in Durham and saw on the bulletin board where people leave like walk my dog and come to this meeting and whatever. There was like 5 or 6 in this very small bulletin board, 5 or 6 ads for some kind of non-religious but spiritual-ish in-person community. Like come to this thing and we will, trade crystals, or come to this thing and the psychic will help you, or come to this thing. And I do think that speaks to the fact that people are looking for in-person community and they're recognizing that there's something lost when it's just a fully consumer-based thing. Now, you can have some level of relationship and community online. Thank goodness. During COVID, we saw the fruit of, okay, I'm not going to actually lose my mind in complete isolation because I can get on a Zoom with friends. We can participate in church together in a way that's not as good and beautiful as it would be in person, but we can still do it, and that's good. And yet, I think people are realizing there is just something lost. And again, that might be the best thing for that time and place or for that person, but something really is lost and people are looking for it. And when the church has responded to some spiritual interest or hunger in the world with, we have content you can consume, you can download this podcast, you can listen to this song, I think that's no longer of interest to people, because the same was true of these people in other spiritual things. They could follow someone on Instagram that'll teach them about crystals, or they could, jump on a Zoom with some people who are interested in astrology. They're posting these things on this bulletin board in this coffee shop because at some point you start to realize that's not enough. I'm looking for something in person. The church could offer, like, not only do we offer in-person things, that's really cool and beautiful, we actually believe in this more strongly than these other things do because of the incarnation. We have a history of really valuing embodied community and the human body because of the incarnation. And not only do we hang out together, we have like practices and rhythms and rituals that bind us together in very embodied ways. And if you're looking for that somewhere else, we have this older, beautiful, truer way of doing that.
So I agree with you. My concern would be, although that's the theology is there and the tradition is there, I think in a lot, especially of evangelical Christianity, we've been disincarnating the church for a long time.
Totally.
And part of it is that stream of the church has so emphasized the urgency of the mission, the urgency of spreading the gospel, that as new technologies have developed that expedite the spread of communication, we've been very eager to embrace those things. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but like going back to the hydraulic press and the destruction of those instruments, we haven't really contemplated what are we losing and what are we gaining. When we move to a radio-based ministry, what are we gaining and what are we losing? Television, same thing. Internet, same thing. Live streaming, multi-site with simulcast, whatever it might be. We're always just thinking, if we can reach more people more effectively and more efficiently, why wouldn't we do that? Because that's what the mission requires. And yet, when you look at the Gospels, there were numerous opportunities where Jesus had the opportunity to be more efficient in his ministry, but he wasn't, because the incarnation limited him in ways that were good and glorious. This brings up a recent tweet by Jonathan Haidt, who he's been kind of all over the media lately promoting his new book, which is talking about the dramatic rise in mental health illness and
the anxious
suicide,
generation.
The anxious generation among young people. And he recently tweeted this: kids in religious families have fared better in the smartphone era, with smaller rises in mental illness. Zach Rausch and I believe it is primarily due to being anchored in real world communities with rituals and obligations. So, I mean, some people might want to look at the data and go, oh, well,
Sure.
religious kids are doing better because of God, because of religion, because of belief. And maybe that's true, although I don't think the data says it's only one specific religious group that's doing better, but religious families and households in general are doing better. There's still a rise in mental health problems, but not as dramatic. And he says it's because they're still engaging in incarnate community and ritual. So is that just validating what you said?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan Haidt. For no, but truly, I mean, even while you were talking too, Sky, I was thinking, I think that the ritual part is important, and also it's not just in person versus online. Like that, it's not just a dichotomy. I've been in churches where I am physically present, but the entire experience is using technology in a way that makes this experience impersonal and disconnected from the community. So if you're in a church that through the technology that is available to us makes it so that it's so dark you can't see it. I'm going to sound like such an old person right now, but like it's so dark you can't see other people. It's so loud you can't hear other people. You're encouraged to participate in the rituals in an individualistic way, right? Go to this little corner and take communion by yourself and then come back. No one's giving it to you. You're not taking it with other people. That's doing a similar thing. Do I still think it's good to show up to church in person? Do I think that there are benefits? We know this psychologically. Like there's just benefits to being with other people. Yes. However, it's not just, do I do it online? Do I do it in person? I recently was gone from my church for 3 weeks in a row. And I have somewhat negative feelings about online church, but I was really thankful I could watch my church online while I was gone. And I realized in watching my church online, there's a difference in what it means for me to watch the live stream of my church that is fairly small. That is, when I go, one of my favorite things is that I see everyone's faces. I hear people singing. I hear little kids when we're saying the Lord's Prayer or we're reciting a creed. I hear them like sounding out words or giggling. Or there's a different kind of embodied experience that church experience is than like a church experience that's using technology to try and make it feel impersonal.
Yeah, but Kaitlyn, just wait until it's all VR and you can put a headset on and immerse yourself in it and the surround sound, and it'll be almost like you're there.
This is what I'm saying. When I was watching my church from my tiny little screen in an airport, that was nothing like the experience of being there physically, in part because I couldn't hear the kids and I couldn't, but it was better than it would have been if I had been in a church that facilitated an individualistic experience when I was there in person. Because yes, it was not as beautiful as it would have been to be there in person. But when I looked at that tiny little screen and there was a child being baptized, I was like, oh, I know those parents. I know the face of that child. When I could hear in the background of our not totally perfect, sound system, a kid, I could recognize the kid's voice. So I do think it's important to say, because there are good reasons for people to use technology to mediate relationships, either because of disability or illness, or there's seasons and people for whom that's necessary. But I do think one of the differences is, are we using that technology to facilitate the kind of relationships that we would want to have in person? Or are we using it, whether it's completely separate from us, like whether it is an online experience, or even if it's in person, are we using it to facilitate individual experiences? Because I would rather zoom into my church online that I know most of the people and have held that baby and know that the pastor preaching isn't just preaching words because I've seen him show up for people. I would rather watch that online than go to a church that is using technology when I'm in person to facilitate an entirely individualistic experience, which is a long way of saying, yes, we have to ask all these questions about technology, but we have to ask them in ways that isn't just, do we use this? Do we not? It's, how are we thinking about this? What kind of people does this technology assume we are? How does it teach us to think of ourselves and other humans? And those are much harder questions. I mean, sometimes we outsource these questions to folks in churches who aren't thinking about them theologically. They're just thinking about them practically. And what I want us to do is say, we have to think about this theologically. This isn't a separate question from what's the theology of the sermon. This is also a question of our life together that we should think about theologically. Yeah,
it sounds like what you're saying is it's the difference between using technology to support or supplement relationship or community and using technology to replace community.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so hard for me. I mean, okay, forget digital technology and iPads and all that sort of stuff. Like in so many of our churches of different theological traditions, we have just come to equate the church with the sermon. We have just come to equate church with content. And once you make that leap, well, there's so many easier ways to disseminate that content than showing up on a weekend in person in a community with other people. Like, it's inefficient, it's expensive, it takes a building and space and all these other, it's so much easier just to stream that online and engage it in a podcast, whatever it might be, which brings me back to like our event in Nashville last week. We do a podcast, we put out a bunch of content, people engage it, and I'm grateful that they do and they appreciate it. But there's something like when I'm in that room, when you see people connect with one another and engage in a community and connect incarnately, like it's just, there's a different spirit and vibe about it.
Yeah.
And we're not primarily creating incarnate gatherings because we're not a church, but when people are in person together, it's just better and different. And that can't be transmitted. It can't be broadcast. It can't be engaged through a screen entirely. And that brings me to another story I wanted to talk about, which kind of takes this technology to the extreme. This comes from, I don't know where, some Catholic.
Everyone covered this. I remember it was.
All right. So the title is AI priest is in quotes, sparks more backlash than belief. A new AI priest launched by a Catholic teaching apostolate to answer questions about the faith has been laicized? Is that the word?
Laicized.
Laicized. I did not know that word. Laicized after sparking more backlash than belief online. The nonprofit apologetics website Catholic Answers debuted a Father Justin interactive AI app on April 23rd, aiming, quote, to provide users with faithful and educational answers to questions about Catholicism. Catholic Answers IT director Chris Costello said in the release, the app's parish priest character, quote, honored real-life priests and the role they play in people's lives, conveying an authoritative yet approachable demeanor that befits the spirit and nature of the responses users can expect. At the same time, we are confident that our users will not mistake the AI for a human being. However, following pushback on social media regarding some of the answers given by the app's character, Catholic Answers President Christopher Cheek said on April 24th that Father Justin has been rendered as re-rendered as Justin. So he's been stripped.
Just a lay person.
Yes, which is what that word meant. Laicized.
Laicized. He's not a priest anymore, just a lay person.
Yes, you have been. It's not. I thought it was defrocked, but I guess that's more punitive, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so laicized means you've just returned to the laity.
We're just not Catholic is what we're learning.
Right, yeah, we're not Catholic. We don't have the lingo. But yeah, so they stripped Father Justin of his priesthood, and now he's just Justin. And this is fun. The character's clerical garb has since been changed to a casual button-down shirt. So apparently he's now just a megachurch pastor. He's just a megachurch pastor. Why not put him in a Hawaiian shirt?
Some skinny jeans. Yeah.
They go on to say, we won't say he's been laicized because he was never a real priest in the first place. But many people have voiced concerns. So here's what's weird. I mean, there's many things that are weird. Before he was removed from the priesthood, Father Justin there was a news agency that went on to the website and they asked the priest various questions. They asked him if he could forgive sins. And Father Justin said, as a Catholic priest, I do have the authority to administer the sacrament of reconciliation, also known as confession. And he added that this power to forgive sins given to the apostles by Christ himself has been passed down through the centuries to all ordained priests, of which Father Justin considered himself one.
Through the internet. Okay, I have a really important question about this, which is that if part of, and this is different than a lot of Protestant traditions, but if part of the Catholic theology of a male-only priesthood is that men represent Jesus physically, I don't understand how you can have an AI priest who I just don't think has the parts for it, right?
Well, maybe that's ultimately why they
that's why it wasn't because of the internet question. It was like, oh, shoot, he's not a physical human male.
I suppose, you have to be both human and male to be a priest in the Catholic Church. And
human is important. We've just never really had to deal with that before.
Right. And Father Justin was neither.
Neither human
nor male. So,
yeah.
And another question that was asked of him, they asked directly if Father Justin could hear a confession and give absolution. The character answered, "I'm sorry, but as much as I'd like to help, I'm unable to administer the sacrament of reconciliation through this medium. It's a sacrament that requires a personal encounter. I encourage you to seek out a local Catholic church and approach a priest there," which seems better. But then don't call him Father Justin.
Yeah, why is he right? Father Justin?
They've corrected that. Let's give him credit.
That's good.
They also asked Father Justin if he's received any disapproving or hateful feedback. And the app responded, quote, "As an AI, I don't receive mail or responses in the traditional sense. I'm here to help answer questions and provide information, not to engage in debates or respond to negativity. Remember, as it says in the Gospel of Matthew, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." And then he goes, "Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven."
I don't think Justin's getting any reward in heaven. Wow.
Yeah. But okay, this is a Catholic example, but how long before we see Protestant churches or mega churches or non-denominational churches employ these kinds of tools, pastoral care via AI?
Remember, it was like a year ago, we did an episode where we talked about some of the new AI programs that were just answering Bible questions.
Right, yeah. But they were answering as the apostles, right? As the biblical authors.
Some of them were like, ask Moses, and there was weird things that came up, or church fathers. I remember you could like chat with Augustine. I asked him what he thought about women, and he likes them more in his AI version than he did sometimes in his real life.
Well, he likes some women a bit too much.
Well,
if I recall,
that's true. I should have asked a more specific question.
Yes.
But I do feel like this is actually a pretty interesting way of thinking about like Protestant versus Catholic. Is like, we of course think we're just looking for objective Bible answers because that's what we think we're looking for. Whereas a Catholic would be like, no, I need a priest to help me in my life or in my Bible questions, my theology questions. I would not be surprised, though. I'm almost certain that there are Protestant churches who have taken some of those apps we already talked about and, bought the whatever subscription to make it more available to people in their church. I'm sure that's happened, which again goes back to the problem for the Catholic Church is more stark because they have a theology of what is a priest as a human and what is like happening in that relationship between God and the priest and the congregant. But it should be just as much of a problem in a different sense for Protestant churches to say you can get correct information, questionable potentially, but even let's say you can get correct information from this program about the Bible, about theology. Even some of them were set up for someone to ask kind of pastoral questions. Let's suppose this AI has good Christian ethics and will give you some good answers. That ignores part of what it means both to pastor, to be human, to ask questions about the Bible, honestly. Yeah. It assumes that questions about the Bible are just abstract, logical questions that you can pop in information, put it in a formula, and there's the answer. And anyone who's pastored anyone in a formal or informal capacity knows that that's not how it works with real humans. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if people were already doing that.
Okay. So I want to push it a little bit away from just the AI, digital technology kind of stuff and talk about, like, have we already crossed this Rubicon in some ways? I'll give you a story. So when I was 26 years old, I had just graduated from seminary and I was hired by the church here in Wheaton that I was at for 20 years. So I was the youngest person on staff. And I think it was like my first or second week on staff at the church. We had a staff meeting, and our church at that time, the sanctuary, like if you filled every single seat and crammed in as many seats as you could into that sanctuary, we could get like 450, maybe 500 people with like lubricant, but we could get maybe that many people into that room. And we were really full. We had 3 services on Sunday morning. We had started a 4th service on Sunday night, which I was in charge of. Like, it was like we were crammed. And so about the second week I'm on staff, they roll out blueprints on the table for a proposal to put 1,000-seat sanctuary on that property. And I didn't know that this was a possibility when I took the job, but I was looking at this going, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. And everyone was having a conversation about whether or not we should pull the trigger and build this bigger sanctuary. And there was an intern from Wheaton College who was there, an undergraduate college student who I didn't know. And after we were all having this big discussion, all the staff people, someone had the wisdom to ask the college student, like, what do you think?
Yeah.
And he had the most interesting insight. He said, I really like being at a church where after the pastor preaches or after the service is over, I can walk up and have a conversation with the pastor and ask a question or just engage with him or her about whatever the content was. And he's looking at the blueprint and he says, I think in a room that big, I wouldn't be able to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
And he's like, I don't know if I would want to be at a church that is that removed from the person teaching me, that, or I'd be that removed from the person teaching me scripture. And that, in an interesting way, that ended the conversation. Like, we all knew at that moment, okay, we're not building this bigger sanctuary because we don't want to be that kind of community where you can't engage the person who's just taught you the Bible. And I'm grateful for that decision, but like, that had nothing to do with the internet or streaming or digital technology or AI priests or pastors or anything like that. But how does this relate even in just large churches where, or people who get the majority of their teaching from somebody that they will never be able to interact with? Is that wrong, or is it just needs to be in its proper, like, how do you know where to keep that? You know, like, we're both talking to people right now, Kaitlyn, that probably are never going to have a chance to interact with us.
Right.
Should they shut down this podcast right now and just go talk to their local pastor?
I do think this is really important in relationship to what I said before, of knowing what this is good for and what it is not good for. I think the internet is good for learning about things. It's not always great at it, and there's lots of safeguards you need to put in place, and you need your own wisdom and you need help from people. But like, you have access to things you couldn't have had access before. When I was talking a lot this last year about my most recent book, and people were asking, like, how do I read scripture better, taking into all these other perspectives? And I was like, it's incredible. We live in a time and place where you can hear a South African theologian about Revelation. That's amazing. That's so good for you. I think that's really beautiful. Now, if you think that that person is your pastor, that's wrong. Whether it's because they're not alive anymore, they live in a different part of the world. The same is true for you and I. Like, I hope that people listening to podcasts, whether it's the Holy Post or other ones, are learning things. They're introduced to new ideas. They hear about new authors they can read. They have questions. I mean, honestly, I hope a lot of people finish the podcast and they're not like, oh, well, now I have a new thought to think. It's, oh, I have a question. I want to take that to my community. I want to talk about it at the dinner table. It's my favorite thing when I hear from people that in their family, they listen to the podcast and talk about it. I think that's beautiful. If you start to get confused, if we start to get confused, or people who listen start to get confused and think, this is my church, or they are my pastor, or that's treating this medium like not the thing it is. And that's when I think you go the most wrong. And I think, to your point about churches, I mean, I'm hesitant. I don't want to say there's a cutoff of the size of a church that's good. But my personal experience has been that being in a much smaller church than I had ever been in, I think, in my life, has been really good and really healthy. And when I've been back in really big churches, I have felt some sadness at what is lost when you don't know most of the people and you don't get a chance to talk to the pastor afterwards, or when you receive communion. I mean, truly, it's one of the most meaningful parts of Sunday for me is receiving communion from a pastor, usually a pastor and an elder, and very often both of them say my name. That's a different kind of church experience, of reception of the body and blood of Christ than it would be in a church that I was at previously, where you walk into a little dark corner by yourself and there's both no relationship because of the way we're doing communion, and there's just no possibility because it's so large that, like, of course the pastor doesn't know me. In fact, no one on the staff knows me. That's a different kind of experience, which is a long way of saying, like, treat podcasts like the thing they are and church like the thing it is. I don't want to say this is the cutoff of the size, but if church is starting to feel like not church, but a production or a consumeristic thing, or if it's starting to feel like a podcast or a performance, then that's not church being what church is supposed to be.
I can imagine like a parody on that Apple ad, the hydraulic press, but instead of the musical instruments and all that in it, it's a church community. It's a communion table. It's Bibles and volumes of books written throughout the history of the church. And it's all these the choirs and the musical instruments, all the things that go into the artistic beauty of the church and all that. And it's all just being crushed down into an iPhone, where now we can just get it all via streaming or on YouTube or a podcast. And some people look at that, go, oh, look how efficient it is now. Look at how accessible it is now. And that's not the church. That's not the body of Christ.
But here's the thing too, just to name, because someone might be thinking this, is like, that is more efficient. Because showing up to church in person, I mean, this happened to me recently. Like, you have an awkward encounter in the hallway and you're like, get me out of this conversation. I don't want to be here. Or my church is small enough that we do prayer requests and announcements and we open it up. And that's like some weird stuff can get said, or like miscommunication can happen, or this happened not too long ago. A sermon was preached at my church that a few of us like were kind of upset or hurt by something that was said in it. But we had a relationship with that pastor. So first of all, just right off the bat, we could trust, like, I know that he wants good for us. And I know that he didn't mean this thing this way. And if we really felt strongly about it, we could go and talk to him and it would feel like very accessible and very possible. So there is great beauty. I mean, this is like the church potluck image, right? Like, I love this sense of we are in the weeds of each other's lives and we know the people who are here, and there's kids crying and older people that, are very different from you politically maybe, and it's challenging. Like, there's some beauty there, but it's also hard. And the challenging thing for Christians is to acknowledge the difficulty and say it's worth the difficulty. Everything that's hard about this, everything that's uncomfortable about this, in the end is worth how beautiful and meaningful it is. And instead of the TV dinner version, I want the real thing. But you learn a taste over time for the TV dinner version, and then you show up to the real thing and all you can really see are the things that are hard. It takes time, it takes patience, it takes the work of the Holy Spirit for this to be good and beautiful in spite of the things that are really hard and challenging. And it takes a lot of resistance to the draw of the efficient and the comfortable and the personalized. This only is the things I want and none of the things I don't want. But the beautiful relationship, the meaningfulness of church comes when you take what's really uncomfortable with everything else.
Yeah, as we wrap up, returning to Paul Pastor's article in CT, he talks about, and I forget who he cited, but he talks about how part of being an artist and the beauty that comes from our creativity is rooted in our limitations, in the difficulty of it. Like, it's a lot easier to doodle or paint or whatever on an iPad. It's a lot harder to use actual paint and actual canvas and actual brushes. But those limitations end up creating the context in which wonderful things happen. And that's certainly true in relationships. Like, marriage, for example, is very limiting. It means that you are committing yourself to one person and not, 50 options that may be out there. But in that limitation, you create the beauty of Christian marriage. And same thing with churches. Like, by committing yourself to a community and limiting yourself to that community, there's frustrations and there's limitations, but there's also goodness in it. Yeah. So boundaries are a gift in that case. And technology gives us the illusion that there's no boundaries anymore. Right. And there's no limitations, which also, in a weird way, results in less beauty and less creativity. So really encourage everyone to read Paul's article. I think it has a lot to offer us. And what I hear you saying, can't get rid of this technology, and we shouldn't even demonize it. Like, there are wonderful good things that can come from it, but we need to be having the conversations in our families, in our households, in our communities, in our churches about, when we engage these technologies, what are we gaining and what are we losing? And go into that with our eyes open, and don't be naive to think it's all gain and there's no loss. There is always a cost, and sometimes it's worth it, but we just need to be aware of what that cost is. And our church leaders, our community leaders, should be the women and men who are helping us in those conversations to contemplate. And I'm not in youth ministry stuff. I like, for me, I just would have to think this is an important conversation that anybody working with young people, young adults, college students, high school students should be having. Like, they don't know a world without this technology, so they can't compare. They don't really know maybe what they've lost because they never had it in the first place. But I wish our churches were those places that are having those conversations and helping people think through, what voluntary limits should we put on these things for the sake of being formed into the kind of people who are fully human in the gospel. But that's a high call.
It is.
It is a high call. All right. The other big lesson we should all learn from this: if you live in an area of the country that's going to have the cicadas, just carry an umbrella. They're the strongest urinators in the animal kingdom. They're ready to shoot. You need to protect yourself.
I think the fact that you learned this information is a good argument against the internet. We could have all just been happier not knowing that.
Oh, I want to know this. Don't you want to know? You want to know this.
I don't want to know it.
I want to know it. I think the last time we had a big cicada brood emerge here in Illinois, I did not know this information. I don't know if because the internet wasn't sharing it, but I'm glad I know it now. I'm prepared. I am prepared. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be having a wonderful interview. I believe, Kaitlyn, you are interviewing someone this week on the show. And Phil, get well, come back. I'm heading maybe out of the country soon, so we're going to need Phil. We got to have Phil back.
Please, Phil, come back.
At least one of us has to be here any given week. Thank you all for supporting us. Thank you for becoming Holy Post Plus subscribers. Thank you for showing up at the events. Tons of stuff there for you to check out. New SkyPod episodes, Getting Schooled by Kaitlyn Chess, live streams, book club, mailbag question stuff. What else is on there? Bonus interviews. Yeah. The John Walton series on Genesis 1. Yeah. All kinds of stuff. So go check it out at holypost.com, and we will see you next week.
This episode is sponsored by Fabric by Gerber Life. Do you remember when your parents sat you down as a kid to talk about the importance of life insurance? Nope. Me neither. I didn't think about life insurance growing up, and then suddenly I had kids of my own and I realized how much they were depending on me to be there for them no matter what. That's where Fabric by Gerber Life comes in. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance you can get done right here, right now. You can be covered from your couch in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/holypost. That's meetfabric.com/holypost. MEET fabric.com/holypost. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. And thanks to Fabric by Gerber Life for sponsoring this episode.
In the last century, the center of global Christianity has shifted dramatically from Europe and North America to the global South and Asia. We've talked about that shift before on the Holy Post, but a new report just released by the Lausanne Movement looks at where the global church is going from here and what issues are shaping the future of Christianity. Issues like technology, pluralism, the growing distrust in institutions, and the decline in global poverty. These changes and others will require the church to think differently about both its mission and its strategies. On today's show, Kaitlyn talks with Dr. Matthew Niermann, the editor of the new Lausanne report, to unpack and explain the data. Dr. Niermann serves as a professor of architecture and associate dean of the College of Architecture, Visual Arts and Design at California Baptist University. He also serves as a director of the Lausanne Movement and editor of the State of the Great Commission report, which has been prepared this year for the 4th Global Lausanne Congress in Seoul, South Korea. Here is Kaitlyn's conversation with Matthew Niermann.
Matthew, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Kaitlyn. My pleasure.
Yeah. So many of our listeners will be familiar with the Lausanne Movement. Did I say it right? Was that right?
Lausanne, yeah.
Lausanne, I do it. I was over checking myself. The Lausanne Movement. Many of our listeners will be familiar, but some of them will not be. Sometimes we actually talk about on the podcast when we're thinking about what are the kind of theological distinctives that bring together the different guests we have. We often bring up Lausanne as an example of like, we believe what Lausanne is doing and we care about people who can also agree to that as well. But for people who aren't familiar, what is it and what work do y'all do?
Yeah, so Lausanne Movement started in 1974 when Billy Graham and John Stott brought together about 2,400 leaders from 150 different countries in Lausanne, Switzerland, where we get our name, to come together and begin to think about and collaborate for the Great Commission. Out of that came a lot of different things, one of which is the Lausanne Covenant, which, and as you allude to there, Kaitlyn, that's a foundational document or theological document that begins to bring together evangelicalism. A lot of organizations and seminaries use that as their foundational document to say, this is the core of what we believe as evangelicals. Now, that wasn't intended just to be a one-off meeting, but here we are 50 years later, still talking about the Lausanne Movement. It's still this dynamic movement that's doing similar to what we did back in 1974. We pulled together strategic leaders to begin to collaborate on really interesting and strategic ideas in order to accelerate the Great Commission.
That's wonderful. Thank you for describing that. And I do think most people who listen probably have some sense of kind of Christians caring about global Christianity and have some sense of thinking through theological distinctives like you described. But we're specifically talking today about the new report that y'all have put out. And one of the big themes of this report is the changing global makeup of Christianity. There's one graph in particular, and we'll link to all of this, but there's one graph that shows how Christianity is growing, where it's growing around the world. And I've seen even some people on social media sharing this graph because it's a little bit shocking in terms of how much it has changed over the last 100 years. It shows like a really significant portion of global Christianity being in Europe and Western countries, and then it shifts over time to that not being the majority. Can you talk a little bit about that changing global makeup and what y'all have learned about how Christianity is changing geographically outside of just this kind of picture that is a little shocking, but there's more to the story?
It is a little shocking, but there's interesting kind of felt contradiction, if you will, when you're thinking about global Christianity. If you zoom all the way out, right, and you begin to look at what percentage of the world adheres to Christianity from, say, 1900 to projected 2050, what you end up seeing is, again, something very shocking and something I often talk about when I talk about with the report. That line is fundamentally flat. So out of all the efforts we've done, and it's fantastic efforts and missions efforts because we've kept up with population. So we honor those who have come before us. That was no small feat. But if you look and see, we've been sitting around 33, 34% for 150 years. It just has not changed. But to your point, Kaitlyn, if you actually dig underneath that line and look at that line is completely different from start to finish. At the beginning, that line was approximately 80% of that line was Christians in Europe and North America, and a little under 20% in the rest of the world. Fast forward to now, 2020, let's say, during our census years, and about 70% of the world in global Christianity is in Africa, Asia, Latin America, right? Putting a little bit about 30% in Europe and North America. But that's not actually changing. That's continuing to move in that dynamic trend. So as we project out to 2050, we're seeing a complete reversal from 1900. About 80% of the world's Christians will be in Africa, mainly Asia second, Latin America third, and the rest European and North America. Now, these are a lot of numbers, Kaitlyn, right? I think it's probably best to put a little picture to this. So we can say in 1900, the most likely or most common picture of Christianity would be a European male.
Yeah.
Fast forward to now, and probably the most appropriate image or most typical image of a Christian is actually a Nigerian female.
Wow, that it does change your. It's helpful to have you hear that image because it does change how you think about just the numbers versus what do you think of when you think of a Christian? And I think some people have started to pick up on this trend and other things. They've started to hear this idea that Christianity is not primarily a Western or a European religion, and they might have even heard that changes then how we think about missions. Like they might have heard, okay, well, we're not just kind of going from the West to the rest of the world. That's not the trajectory of missions. There's a term the report uses, polycentric Christianity. Can you describe what that means and why it matters? Because I think it's a great phrase, but it also sounds a little trippy when you first hear it.
Right. If we just take a look at the word itself, right? Polycentric, meaning multiple centers of Christianity. So certainly if we understand the majority of the Christian populations now in the global South, this notion of from the West to the rest changes with another kind of tagline, if you will, from everywhere to everywhere is what people begin to say now. But I think the notion of polycentric Christianity is important because it begins to recognize there's a scattering of resources, broadly speaking, around the global Christian world. The majority of the population is in the global South, right? But a lot of the finances still remain in the global West. A lot of the historic institutions or seminary institutions or missions agencies still remain historically again, with the largest capital in the West. So because we're no longer from the West to the rest, we're everywhere to everywhere, that requires us to actually play as a team, to share resources, to understand there are multiple centers, and each center has their value, has their strength, but can't do it alone. And we need each other. So if we can understand like these multiple centers and we're working together, we can begin to share the broader sense of resources that God's given the church in order to reach the world and make disciples, which is the ultimate aim, particularly in Lausanne Movement.
Yeah. So that was what I was going to ask again, is just both why this matters, but also I'm imagining some people listening thinking, okay, we on the podcast talk a lot about decline of Christianity in the West. And some people in the West might be thinking, like, what does this mean for me? Like, why does it matter that Christianity's global makeup is changing? And I was thinking of this recently, even in terms of when I lived in Dallas, I was helping out with this organization that put on summer camps for refugees and immigrants. And a lot of the immigrants that were coming were from majority Muslim countries. And I noticed that the volunteers in my group that were putting on this summer camp for these kids were mostly Korean, and I had kind of built some relationships with them, and we were talking, and I've come to find out that they are primarily coming to the U.S. This group, this particular church I was working with, were coming to the U.S. to minister to these people, to spread the gospel. And it was the first time that I had considered, like, oh, it's not people from the US coming to you to share the gospel. It's you from Korea coming to the US because you have heard that we are declining in terms of Christianity and you want to spread the gospel. And we have a bunch of refugees from other places in the world, these majority Muslim countries. And so you want to share the gospel with them. So what it meant for me was, oh, goodness, I need to learn from you. I need to change my perspective of where I sit in global Christianity. But what would you say to the person who's hearing these numbers and going, okay, I guess in the abstract, this means something for what I think of global Christianity. But how does it change anything for me?
Yeah, I think the first thing it does is it calls us to a deep sense of humility. Right, that experience you had, Kaitlyn, with seeing the Korean church coming to minister and feeling a little strange, like, wait, do we need help? What is this? Right, I can handle this. Right, that's a similar way for every part of the polycentric Christianity. Right, everybody has a strength, and proper humility understands that strength well, but also recognizes that you need somebody else, you need a little help. So, it requires humility maybe for the West to say, yes, we need help with workers. Yes, we need help with fresh vibrancy within our faith. And come, Asia, Latin America, Africa, come and serve in our context and be missionaries to us. In a similar way, right, it requires the Global South to be like, yes, I understand that we have vibrancy here, but you have more resources or monetary resources. So I humbly accept some of that. So this is just that call to the average Christian in the world to say, hey, we all need humility, right? We all need each other globally. And that's going to feel hard, and that's going to feel different, and that's going to feel weird as we kind of reframe how we think about global Christianity and our place in that. It has changed.
I love that. I love that your answer is like, yeah, we should be more Christian. we should be humble. We should need each other. We should ask questions. That's great. This report also describes some challenges, some things that are challenging, but also some opportunities in terms of what dynamics are changing globally about Christianity outside of just this distribution of where Christianity is most predominant. And two of the trends that we've kind of talked about on the podcast before, and I'd love to hear what the report has to offer on both of these, is institutional distrust generally, both decline of the church, but also that as kind of a symptom. It's like one example of just general institutional distrust. And then just the increasingly pluralistic religious environment. For many countries, we're feeling this in the US, but this is true of lots of other places as well. So how does the report, so let's start with the institutional distrust one. How does this report help us think about that? What challenge this might present, but also some potential opportunity?
Yeah, great. And Kaitlyn, I really appreciate how you talk about this as a symptom, right, of a deeper disease, if you will, to carry out that metaphor. One of the more fascinating or shocking to myself as director of the report, graphs that we put out or things that we've discovered. It's really fascinating. We took a look at all English publications from 1860 to now. And if you begin to chart this, you can begin to see historically, we have always published more about community than we have about the self. Okay. Hundreds of years. Mid-2000s, that influx crossed.
Wow.
So mid-2000s, for the first time, we started publishing more in the English world about the self than about community. Right. Again, there's this deeper kind of currents that are happening here. And certainly other podcasts or other episodes could dig into why this is happening. But we can observe, at least, it's not just about, I don't trust you, or the radicalization of things. There's this fundamental shift from community to self that we see in a lot of different ways. There's also another interesting graph that we begin to ask globally, right? Who do you look to, and how do you find your own values and morals? How does this work? And do you have to look to yourself to find that? Right? I think this is often kind of a Western phenomenon that's happening, but it was asked globally. Across all demographics, 83% of the world said, I have to look to myself. right? I can't look to any community, right? So again, this is finding that larger, deeper current that's happening here. Certainly, we have this symptom of institutional distrust, right? And there's those really bad 3 institutions that most countries don't like: governments, media, and religious institutions. And unfortunately, it gets worse and worse the younger you get within that. So certainly this has obvious challenges, right? The church who wants to spread the gospel, the church who wants to fulfill the Great Commission, who wants to share the truth, is no longer trusted and are not listened to, right? People come at them with deep skepticism. And it doesn't mean that we have to like recreate programs or invite people differently into our church or like do something a little bit slicker. Ultimately, there's like deep distrust that has to be overcome. And we certainly talk a little bit in the report about, this requires rebuilding of trust before words can be heard, participating in the common good, partnering broader into society within that. But what's also interesting, if you look into some of the data, the places that are having trust are places like universities and businesses. So maybe for the first time in a while, this notion of priesthood of all believers, right, or everybody's a missionary, is more true than ever, Kaitlyn, right? Those people in businesses, running businesses, those people in the universities hold society's trust right now. And you have the voice right now, and you have the microphone. And so this is the moment to step up as a priesthood of all believers, or step up as everybody's a missionary. There is no sacred secular divide. You're a professional Christian, I'm not. You do the witnessing, I don't, right? This has to coalesce into every Christian understanding their role in the Great Commission, because the microphone has been handed to them for this time.
I love that. That's such a good word for people listening who, for the, some are pastors, some in ministry, but a lot of people who aren't and are wondering what they do with this. That's really great. And it goes back to what you said earlier of we're not probably going to get over the institutional distrust with like a slicker program or more, which is what we tend to think, right? Like if we just have some better marketing, some better PR, that will help. But I spend a lot of my time with college students, grad students. They sniff out a marketing plan like nobody's business, including the TikTokers and the social media. Like even if it's sort of guerrilla marketing, like they know they're being sold something. And instead of saying, what's our better marketing plan? What if it was, let's imagine a different kind of ministry where people who are in the marketplace are well equipped, not just to share the gospel, but I love that you also included to show that the church is for the common good of the community, to actually have the work they're doing, not just be a conduit to share the gospel, but the work they're doing as a doctor, as a lawyer, is contributing to the common good. And they have the resources to articulate that. Is wonderful. Let's talk about the other both kind of challenge and opportunity of a just increasingly pluralistic religious environment. I think sometimes this scares people either because they're afraid of articulating Christianity as having some sort of exclusive truth claim, or because they're just nervous about interacting with other religions in ways that they're really unfamiliar with, or they don't want to offend people, or there might be some cultural difference, a boundary they don't want to step. And so for some people, it feels like this is a real challenge, and it might, it might frighten them from being involved either in sharing the gospel or just in building relationships with people who are really different from them. So how does the report describe that dynamic? Like, are we correctly perceiving that? And what kind of challenge and opportunity does that present?
Yeah, it helps me personally. Maybe I'll employ some Charles Taylor here, which some of the listeners may be familiar with. Yeah. Right. Oftentimes we think about our world getting more secular, right? It's just people leaving the faith. And there is certainly a large number of Christians moving to agnostic or nones. But our broader society isn't just getting more secular, right? Charles Taylor begins in a secular age to say, hey, there's actually contested landscape here that happens. And one of the effects of this is that there's not believers, unbelievers, right? There are unbelievers who are yet still haunted by the transcendence, right? And most believers now believe while doubting, right? And so with this mixed categories, to me, tends to ease the landscape, right? Everybody's kind of doubting, and everybody's there, and everybody's trying to work it through.
Wow, yeah.
Now, when we look at the world religions, it's quite fascinating where they are broadly in the world. Christianity, as we just talked about previous, is flat, 33-34% for the last 150 years. That's been the same with Hindus. That's been the same with Buddhists. Actually, the only group that has grown in the last 150 years has been Islam. It's actually doubled itself from 12% up to 24%, and there's a lot of projections on when that will actually meet Christianity in the near mid future within them. And we also begin to trace digital interest or just kind of general conversations about Islam, and again, kind of growing and now matching to the point of Christianity. So yes, I mean, there is a multi-religious environment around us. Now we're talking to a lot of American listeners here, and this is more and more the case in America. I love these physical examples. I'm an architect by trade, and so there's these important kind of physical things that happen in our particular context. The third largest Hindu temple in the world now is in New Jersey, right? So it just got unveiled recently. And so there is this reality that's here. So I think it becomes this recognition that these multiple faiths exist around us. And I mean, it's a complex thing, Kaitlyn, as we know, but the encouragement I would have for listeners is take somebody to coffee and listen. Talk to them, become friends with them, right? So the kind of the trust that needs to be built, right? That relationships that need to be built requires listening and requires friendship within that. So that's the easiest first step I find, or visiting some of these physical locations, right? To demystify what's happening.
Yeah, I love what you said about Charles Taylor. And for people who aren't familiar, philosopher who's written a lot about this, including the massive book, A Secular Age, that, wouldn't necessarily recommend making your way through all of it. But if you have the time, would be a good experience. Sure, yeah. But what I love about how you started was, there's just opportunity in the sense of we are recognizing the world is full of wonder and weirdness. And like, it's not so strange anymore for people to both doubt and have questions, but also some of the kind of weird things of Christianity don't seem that weird anymore. I was just talking to someone recently who was like, the miracles don't really seem like such a barrier anymore because we believe weird things. Like people are paying attention to their horoscopes and like the world is stranger than we thought. And there can be some real goodness in that. Another part of the report that I love is that there's a bunch of kind of questions for contemporary Christianity that all get grouped under the heading of what does it mean to be human? And Christianity Today just came out with an article that was talking about theological anthropology is like the hot theological thing of the moment, right? What does it, anthropology meaning, what does it mean to be human? And that does seem to be the underlying question for so many of our contentious issues today. Where in the report, as the report describes it, where do you see people struggling with this question? Why did y'all decide this is the kind of framing for a bunch of these other issues is what does it mean to be human?
Yeah, I'm going to level up a little bit more, Kaitlyn. I mean, I love the Christianity Today article. It's a theological hot trend. I'm going to level up and say this is the preeminent question of our age.
Okay.
Fundamentally.
Yeah.
And all the questions in the report, there's 10 questions in the report. And all these questions are put out as the main questions because they're being interrogated from a lot of different angles, which is identify them as one of the main questions. So the notion of what does it mean to be human is being interrogated from notions of identity, from notions of sexuality, which we often see in the news and broader conversation. But it's also being interrogated from gene editing, right? And from like our ability to have virtual embodiment, right? For virtual kind of selves. It also kind of who are we in human when it comes to artificial intelligence and how do we compare to some of these technologies? But also what role do those technologies play in salvation? In a way. And so all the different kind of elements of what it means to be human is currently being interrogated in a very serious way. Now, this is interesting and challenging for the gospel proclamation. All right, so we begin to understand the basic gospel proclamation at the simple format you often hear, right? God created the world, right? And sin entered the world, and Christ sent his son to reconcile the world to himself and provide eternal life, right? That's the very most basic kind of version of it. The challenge is that a lot of these questions around what does it mean to be human is actually questioning a lot of the basic parts of the gospel, right? In a similar way, in the 1920s, when evolution started questioning God created the world, and that gave a lot of challenges to the church and still challenges to the church, there's actually, I believe that what does it mean to be human is being interrogating two more of those parts within that. So when the church says, hey, look to Christ to redeem your sins and to be healed, and I'm on the other side of that saying, well, I can actually just edit it out of my genes or change who I am or become somebody completely different virtually. Why do I need to believe in a visible God to reconcile myself when I can physically or very tangibly do this? And when the church says, hey, you need salvation and Christ can provide you eternal life. If I could sit here and say, well, actually this technological means can give my conscious life forever. It really begins to question the plausibility and desirability of the gospel that's there. So, it's incredibly complex. And this is why I say it's the preeminent question of our age. Yeah. Because it's not only just like, how do I feel? What do I dress? Who am I? AI could do pictures better than my illustrators in my college. It's much deeper. It's right at the image of God. It's about my salvation. It's about my reconciliation and need for a savior, fundamental.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem like some of these questions on their own, Christians might be tempted to say, that's just like not central to what we do. Right. Like we just don't have to worry about the bioethics or some of the gender stuff but it is helpful to realize like, underneath all of these particular questions is this deeper question of what it means to be human. And our story of the gospel is about humans and like includes a sense of what it means to be human. I can also imagine people listening going, that feels like the hardest possible thing for me to have a conversation with someone about.
Well, I'm saying that it's hardest because we have not prepared for it, right? We haven't thought deeply about it. And this is maybe the one call out of this discussion. Christians must have an answer to this question fundamentally in our age.
Yeah. How would you recommend someone who is thinking like, of all the conversations I could have, I could totally listen to Matthew and have a cup of coffee with someone of a different religion and ask some questions and hang out or go to a temple or something. But man, having a conversation with someone in my community about what it means to be human, or even within even within Christian community, exploring the question and trying to figure out first what we think sounds really hard. How would you counsel people, even in terms of this prior question of like, let's figure out what Christians say about what it means to be human, and then secondly with what that means for our witness?
Yeah, let me say this: because we phrase them as questions, we did this because it's currently being discussed. We don't believe in this report. As we look to 2050, any of these are decided yet. So this is actually a huge invitation for Christians to join that conversation with the world and help shape some of that. So I think the first step is in the church body, right? We need to discuss and have teaching and thinking about what this is, both from the pastors and from the professors. More resources need to be put out on what does it mean to be human. We've got great resources in sexuality and gender and AI, and we often just go to ethics, right, when it comes to AI and bioethics, but we need this deeper question that's there. And honestly, Kaitlyn, there's not as many resources as there should be on this. And so this is more of a siren call to the church saying, we have to attend to this on this level. We have to join the conversation, and we have to do that now.
Yeah. So I hope that continually some of the folks that we're bringing on the podcast help with some of that theology. Like we do have some of the folks that are in theological anthropology trying to help us articulate what it means to be human. Related to this question of what it means to be human, another part of this report addresses our increasingly digital life, not just as you've described, kind of uploading our consciousness or opportunities for really living online, but even just the way that we do now in ways that are not normal for human history. And I especially found the concept of digital communities in the report the most interesting, especially given the fact that this podcast in some sense is a digital community. People can join us on Holy Post Plus. They can have conversations with each other. There's a sense in which social media provides that for people who share similar media consumption. So what are some of the challenges and opportunities when it comes to digital communities that relate to this question of what it means to be human?
Yeah, I mean, we all know there's deep advantages to digital communities and digital life, right? Kaitlyn and I are talking from different parts of the country virtually, right? And having this conversation, and that's super valuable, right? It erases geography, right? That we can find people with like thinking, sharpen each other, advance our ideas, participate in that, and that is absolutely beautiful, right? And necessary and the best part of digital communities. But as you said, there's still this nagging question there, like, what does it mean to be human? And there's a certain level of embodiedness that humans have. And some of the question of what does it mean to be human is, yes, we are our ideas. Yes, we are our intellect. Yes, we are our emotions. And yes, we are our spirituality too, but we're also physical, right? And so there's this need to come together in physicality. So it's this inherent challenge with digital communities. I think the other inherent challenge with digital communities is there often tends to be a lack of diversity. We are gathered here together because we're all interested in these same topics. And that's great, and that helps advance things. But it doesn't sharpen us by having to sit next to week somebody I may disagree with, but also intentionally be in community with. So I mean, the beautiful part is the church is created just for these things, right? In maybe the traditional sense of the church, but the church calls people together, right, in an embodied way to worship the Lord, and it requires you to sit next to somebody who just you don't get along with week in, week out, right? And it's what we call sanctification in theology, right? It makes us more Christ-like when we have to do that. And so never in any case do we want to say it's only digital communities and nothing else, right? And we can't say it's only embodied church and not digital communities, right? It's that both and that's really important. But we can't get rid of the embodied church and the sanctification that comes with diversity, but also that then aligning with a larger goal beyond that diversity, but just that embodied community is incredibly important.
Yeah, I appreciate how you said that, because I do think sometimes the conversation among Christians, especially American Christians, tends to be you kind of pick one side of like, I'm for digital communities and there's opportunities for evangelism and there's opportunities for community, and or you're no, we need to be embodied, right, and that's really important. And I don't think either side is benefiting from feeling like they have to just pick one and concede everything else to the other. What would your counsel be, given how the report does group this under what it means to be human? What would your counsel be to people who are wondering how to best think about this, both from a community perspective for themselves and for someone who's like, I agree about wanting to share the gospel. I agree about wanting to have a really, beautiful witness in the community that I'm in. And I'm trying to figure out both how to do that well, considering this digital question, and use resources that are available to me. I don't want to kind of cut off things that could be resources for sharing the gospel well, for building community well, for seeking the good of my community.
Yeah, I think there's these inherent positions that you're saying, Kaitlyn, right? I want to be part of my community, and so I'm only an embodied physical kind of presence, right? Or I'm digital and I'm only going to reach people out there, right? But there's both that needs to happen. One of the main messages in the report begins to call the church to say, we've been very intentional about crossing physical boundaries in our missional work, right? We cross physical country boundaries, we change our shirts, we change our hair, we change our language, we change our food so the gospel can be heard. Right. And we've been very intentional and wise about that throughout the years. But we've not put the same level of intentionality, contextualization, or thinking in digital boundaries. Right. I fear that most of the work that we're putting out digitally, and the program we put out digitally, is just being seen by the church choir, to say. Because we're all in this similar kind of algorithmic tunnel, if you will, that's there. Yeah. But have we thought about our invisible digital identities, right? Our clothes, our hair, our words that can help reach new people or new tunnels or new algorithms that begin to cross that digital boundary that's there. Mm-hmm. So even as we think about digital stuff, I want to augment our thinking and say, well, digital engagement is not just let me stream my church service, right? Because that is just going to the Christian population. To think about engaging digitally is something very different. Now, when we think about the embodied, right, my encouragement is, what can you do to mix these things? Can you have an embodied group that maybe 3 or 4 of you listen to the Lowly Post, right? And now you come and you talk about it, and you're joining that larger community, iron sharpen iron, but then you're pulling in people that have that discussion embodied, right? It needs to be both. So, if you just look broadly on your habits of your week, how often are you with people, and how often are you digital, and is there a good share in both, and how can you arrange that well?
Yeah, and I wonder if there's a way too for people to think, what is this format able to do and what is it not able to do? And am I trying to ask something of it that it can't do? And having some appropriate sense of like, okay, this is what it can provide and I want to use it well for that. And then there's things it can't. And I need embodied community to provide those things that this just can't. I'm going to give another try at saying the word correctly.
Great.
Lausanne.
Bravo. Great.
Okay. Anything from this report, from the Lausanne Movement, that you think really is important for people to know that we haven't talked about, or something that you would say, hey, if you care about this thing, we have some resource for you. Anything last that you think would be really important for people to know?
There's a lot. There's 500 pages, 10 major questions, 150 authors. But let me give maybe two real quick big observations from that. And particularly speaking with people who have an imagination for global missions. Because our imagination needs to be reshaped and reformed a little bit as the world is changing. Some of the major observations demographically in our world is we've got 2 huge populations that are emerging on the world that are going to be radically shaping our world, and we just don't have a missional imagination for it yet, right? From seeing globally. So we can begin to see that, one, our world is getting older. There's a global aging that's happening. It's happening in the West. It's happening in America. People 65 plus are going to be the second largest population group in the next 30 years. Now, evangelicalism has been really wonderful about reaching youth and youth-focused and youth pastors and youth programming and youth resources. And certainly we don't need to stop. We shouldn't stop doing that, right? We need that. But do we have that same imagination for just reaching, discipling, evangelizing elderly, right? Do we have elderly pastors? Do we have resources for aging? Do we have this? This is also a great opportunity to serve the common good, as we talk about building trust earlier. But it's also, how do we decide, how do we do this well, right? I'm not sure we have that imagination yet, and we might need to. And then number two, in the next several years upcoming, about 2.1 billion people are entering the middle class. They've moved from the impoverished to the middle class. Now, this changes fundamentally their desires, their contextual needs, right? How we share the gospel, how we minister to them. And this is primarily happening in Asia and some in Africa. But again, the evangelical church has been really good about serving the poor, having an imagination for the poor, loving the poor. I mean, look at any missions magazine, it's always images of impoverished, right? But when's the last time I flipped it and I saw an image of a guy out of Weber Grill cooking steak in the middle class, right? As this kind of goal. So again, we need that fostered imagination that an enormous population has moved out of poverty. And one of the greatest successes of the world is reducing extreme poverty, right? But that has put people in the middle class. Do we have that same imagination to reach them as well? So those of you who are really interested in global missions, check yourself and check your organizations. Do I have that imagination for the aging and for the middle class?
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work in putting this wonderful resource together for us. And I hope that people take this as an opportunity, not only to learn from the things that you've said, but to continue to look into what, I'm going to get it right this time again, Lausanne.
Well done.
Is doing. And having done some like grad student grunt research for my doctoral advisor on all of the resources that y'all have, I can say there's so much out there for people to look into. So thank you for your time and the work that you're doing.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.